Atran's hearts were doing a very good approximation of the end of the HFY. It was an interesting celebration, the product of thousands of years of traditions that were hardly even thought about anymore. The entire point of it was to honor a great warrior of his own species, who was said to have killed their gods and broken them free from their servitude. The tale said that HFY had, after freeing his kind from their shackles, run all the way around the world, so, as part of their tribute to him, those taking part who were still conscious would run on the spot until they passed out or, by some miracle, completed the impossible distance. Atran tried his best to not stare at the beings that had taken over a good half of his bar and wished for HFY's courage and strength. 17 of the serpentine Shalsisi lounged over the modular stools, creating a constant hissing that was more akin to a broken steam pipe than actual speech. They were in the process of drinking him out of house and home, and so far had paid only with raised plasma pistols and threats veiled so thinly even the deaf would pick out the danger. Not only that, but the largest of them, their leader, was Slisison, wanted for so many crimes. Atran was certain he couldn't recall them all. Mass murder and piracy and forced takeover of 20 space stations stood out though. So, he stayed quiet, he served them drinks, and kept his eye off the terrified young human male that the gang was surrounding. One of them was forcing the boy to drink Sava sap and giving a piston-like laugh at the human's disgusted expressions. Another was boasting loudly about how much money they were going to get for this score. A third was in the process of describing why all the propaganda about humans was complete and utter rubbish. Because if they were really as scary as they claimed to be, the boy would have killed them all by now. The boy, clad in a grey flight suit with colored patches on the upper arms and torso, just pulled his knees up to his chest, tucked in his head, and continued making that odd, loud sound. Whenever his face was visible, Atran had spotted some kind of fluid glistening on the boy's face that certainly wasn't the horrid green Sava sap. He didn't know much about humans, but he was sure they were not supposed to do that. He kept cleaning glasses, working at them 2 at a time with his forearms, just to make sure there would always be a steady supply of glasses, ready for any of the Shalsisi demands that flew his way. His counter already had several deep gouges in it from their claws. He didn't need any more property damage. The door slid open, and all the Shalsisi went quiet. In the entrance stood a Clyran, one of Atran's own kin. The young quadruped took in the sight of 17 predatory and armed specimens of one of the most dangerous species in the galaxy, blinked twice, and then turned and left without a word, his magne boots clanking against the metal flooring. Atran sighed. He certainly did not want to witness a murder. Still, it would be nice to have some patrons who would actually pay. The owners of this establishment were certainly going to fire him after this travesty. And no matter how hard he tried, he couldn't tune out the little human's noises. He tried to stop his limbs from quivering and watched the smallest of the Shalsisi slithering toward him. One faltry grued cocktail and a Sava sap. It hissed, his hood flaring and long fangs flashing. The serpent towered over Atran easily, its underbelly glistening with the metallic strips that would keep it from floating away in a station devoid of gravity, and the rest of its dark brown scales were partly hidden beneath golden armor plates. Coming right up, Atran squeaked. It was very hard to stop his instincts from begging him to flee as far and as fast as possible when faced with such a threat. That Shalsisi could kill him in so many ways, and there was absolutely nothing he could do about it. But if he tried to run, they would shoot him in the back without so much as a thought. So, his best chance of survival, unfortunately, was acting as their personal servant, making sure the glasses were fully sealed with their specialized no-graft straws in place. The drinks were swept away as soon as they were ready, and the Shalsisi bared his fangs at Atran one more time before sauntering back to the child. Another serpent raised its arms and snatched the Sava sap, leading the 2 to have a show of snapping their jaws at each other. And then Slisison moved. He didn't have armor, just the magne strips over his underbelly, but he did have some kind of cylindrical weaponry strapped to each of his 2 arms. All he had to do was raise his head from where he was lounging and stare. The two fighting Shilsisi stopped instantly and slowly turned to look at their leader before mumbling apologies and slinking downward to make themselves as small as they possibly could. A third Shilsisi took the sap and grabbed the child by its suit. "Drink up, human," it said, pushing the glass container at the boy's face. He started screaming. And then the serpent holding the child screeched. All the others stopped and watched its smoking arm, coupled with the sava sap, spin off into the air. The glass shattered when it bounced against a table, spilling its viscous content. "Next one hits your brain," an unfamiliar voice barked. "Now, hand over the boy and your weapons, and no one else needs to get hurt." Atran had no idea when the door opened, but now there was another being in the bar. Short and bipedal, it held a smoking pistol of some kind in one hand and a long sword in the other. Every inch of it was covered in grey armor, which appeared to be fairly thin and form-fitting, and its face was hidden behind a blank black visor. "Human," the largest Shilsisi spat, stopping the others in their tracks as they leveled weapons against the intruder. "You speak with bravado that you cannot support. Leave, or we will crack open your costume and feast on your bones." The human tilted its, or her, if Atran was guessing right, head. "Not gonna surrender then?" she asked. Now all the Shilsisi were laughing. Even the one missing its arm joined in, holding tight to the boy with its remaining limb. "You're one and a female. What hope could you have?" a voice snapped from the crowd. After a long pause, apparently waiting for the laughter to die down, the human looked upward. "Let it be known that all targets refuse the offer of surrender, and any of my actions from this point forward are covered under the fair game laws, with regards to the bounty hunter's treatise of Aquilon," she said, about as calm as a meditating Ryuk. Before anyone could comment on her words, her armor changed. In a long steady wave, from her boots to her helmet, her suit glowed faintly for a fraction of a second, before simply disappearing. Plasma bolts flew from the serpents, but there was no sign of any of them hitting. "Lycerus, do you sense anything?" The purple fleck Shilsisi drew its hood inward, and its forked tongue flicked out from between its fangs. "No. It is as if she has ceased existing," the serpent apparently named Lycerus said. "I had heard rumors of their cloaking technology, but no being can hide from my tongue." That was right, some Shilsisi had an ability to just know if a being of a particular species was nearby, just by tasting the air. If the human could hide from that, maybe Gahern wasn't exaggerating when he said they were ghosts. The smallest was the first to die. One moment it had a head, the next it didn't. Two holes just appeared in the torso of another before the first had even stopped falling. Burning green plasma splashed over every surface in the Shilsisi retaliation as they desperately tried to land a hit on a target they couldn't detect. "Stop," Slisson hissed, and the barrage slowed to a halt. His tongue flicked out a few times. "Her scent is lost in your cowardice, worms." He flexed his claws and raised his own weaponry. "I want her alive. With the secrets of her." Lycerus twitched, and its head buckled downward as black blood spurted out of the top. A harsh blue laser filled the space above the dead Shilsisi's head, and at the same time there was a muffled thump from the ground next to the newest corpse. A glass flung up from a table and slammed into one Shilsisi's head, followed by another a few seconds later from the exact other side of the room, and a fraction of a second after that, by a very neat and silent gunshot tunneling through another serpent's skull. Drops of onyx blood drifted lazily in the air, joining shattered silicate fragments. Atran slowly sank beneath his counter, his legs folding neatly beneath him. At least, there he was safe from the Shilsisi and their wild attacks. Every few seconds, he was sure he could hear the whistle of that blade, or some projectile zipping through the air, closely followed by a gurgle, a thump, and a lot of hissing and burning. Perhaps it would be best to not have to Ravia's courage. Atran certainly did not want to get involved in this conflict. A shadow appeared above him. Atran flinched to see the little boy human clambering up and over his counter. The child dropped to the floor next to him and huddled up against the barrels of fluids beneath the bar. He stared straight forward, breathing shallow, but far faster than Atran's lungs could manage even in panic. Some of his rust-colored hair looked a bit burned. Atran, after watching the boy for a moment to see if his lungs would collapse from sheer exertion, simply stared forward again. He was definitely going to be fired. Cleaning up ordinary bars was hard enough, but in zero gravity, he would be lucky to get any job after this one. The bar's company certainly wasn't going to give him a reference after allowing this to happen. Perhaps he should start practicing some kind of unusual talent, ready for when he had to go busking on the streets of a backwater rimworld. Apparently some people were fond of the juggling that humans had brought with them from their homeworld. With his forearms, such an act should be simple to perform. Another blue beam streaked through the expanse of bottles above Atran's head, sending liquids of all flavors dancing into the air. Or perhaps the company would just arrest him. They could certainly bill him for the damages, which were now several orders of magnitude greater than he could afford. Or they could make him work off the damage which, if his current calculations were correct on his current wage, would mean he'd be free of their service in 7 lifetimes, give or take 1. And he had been about to jump into a career change too. At least his hearts had calmed down a bit. The sound stopped. There were no more rogue plasma shots or lasers. The only movement was from floating bits of glass. The boy's furrowed brows pulled closer together, and he stood up just enough to peer over the top of the flat metal counter. His small eyes grew wide. Curious, Atran also lifted his head. The other human re-emerged into visibility on a gossamer wave of light. She was holding her sword out, where it was still skewering the dreaded Silsison through the heart. The Shulsisi's brain hadn't quite realized his body was dead yet, causing his arms to still twitch toward the bounty hunter. Irate Silsison, for your confirmed crimes against 192 nations, which include but do not fully comprise mass murder, slavery, kidnapping, hostile coups of sovereign territories, and the destruction and subjugation of pre-spaceflight sapients, I carry out your death sentence. The armored human then pulled her blade free of the serpent, and she watched it drift slowly toward the front door. She looked up again. BH 97428, codename Reaper, reporting the apprehension and subsequent destruction of Public Enemy No. 3 and 16 subordinates, as well as the recovery of human child Tyler Johnson. A spot above her head shimmered, and then a small metallic orb appeared. Affirmative. Sending transmission to the bounty office now, it buzzed. Message delivered. Funds are in the process of being transferred. See Raven. I can be professional, Reaper said. Evidence of one professional act does not denote total professionalism. Your record still leaves much to be desired. Oh, shut up. The human, still moving utterly silently, stalked toward the counter. Atran felt the fridges behind him bump against his spine as he instinctively backed up. Fortunately, it seemed this human was done with violence for the day, and she just placed something on the counter. Reparations. Sorry about the mess, she said. Her visor turned to regard the boy. Come on, kid. Let's get you home. With one hand, Reaper helped the young boy to climb back over the counter. Atran watched them go, watched Tyler wave as he was let out of the door and out of his life. And then he turned to survey the damage. It was hard to find a surface that didn't have plasma damage or long lines of black from those damned laser cannons Silsison was so fond of. Some of the tables had melted beyond recognition. So much glass was in the air it was probably a hazard to breathe, and who knew what was in the streaks of Shulsisi blood. The blinking light on the credit sheet the bounty hunter had left behind called Atran's attention. He tapped the button and read the holographic display. Then he read it again. That many zeros. It was enough to repair and clean the bar 3 times over. It was enough to have the company completely forget this incident ever happened. It was enough to retire on. A very thoughtful Atran picked up the chip, switched off its display, and carefully trod out of the bar. Perhaps he didn't need to learn to juggle after all. Author's name and link to original text is in the description.